Okay, we are here to talk about soul essence. And this was the hardest by far of the terms of the six faces, six currents of the divine feminine for me to come up with, because we don't have a word for it really in English. And there's all these great words in other languages, in other spiritual traditions, and we don't super do it well. Or even some of the words that we do have a lot of connotation, like a lot of baggage to them. They mean really different things to people in our area of the world, with our background for most of us. So, soul essence, when we're talking about this, is like this animating force. It's like our life force. In the tantric yogic Hindu tradition, we have all these words to talk about, like rising, like prana is our breath and our life force, and we have kundalini, like this great awakening essence, sexual awakening, animating essence. And we have shakti, which is probably, if I were just going to pick, we wouldn't be soul essence, we would be shakti here. But shakti is, in the yogic tradition, in tantra, it is the energy of the goddess. And in tantra, this is the energy that moves the whole world. This is the energy of creation, of life. That we have consciousness, the masculine, Shiva, the emptiness, the space, the sky, and we have Shakti. That is how we move through the world, the energy that animates us. And throughout tantric tradition, she has multiple faces, and we're going to talk about the elements that this can look like. But a core tenet of this idea of Shakti, of soul essence, is that there is no dualism. We don't have like our bodies that are terrible, and then we have our consciousness that we're trying to like escape from all this muck, that the muck of earth is the way, our bodies, our physicality. And this really, one of my favorite ideas is that this really fits with the path of most women, is this idea of the householder's path. That it is through the like nurturing babies, or being a great friend, or like the mundane tasks of our lives, that we expand, we grow, we become, we unbecome. And Tantra, this non-dualism, says that all of this earthiness is also divine, that we are seeking for the divine in everything, including ourselves, that there is no just like divine out there and we're schmucks. The divine also is in here. It's maybe another phrase that we could use for the soul essence is like this divine spark. And that really plays into this idea of home buyers, of where it began. We have this spark, and sometimes when we don't tend it, it's like this faintest little pilot light. But our work here is to remember it, to tend it, to stoke it, to attend to the embers that are our soul. So we have moved more deeply through our weeks. We started off in rhythms, and this is like a core place that we can't ignore, and to look at ourselves as cyclical beings, and also look at the rhythms of our lives, our days, and the earth, how they're all related. And one rhythm that we didn't pay a ton of attention to is our daily rhythm. Like, how are we moving through our day? Are we feeling resourced and nourished just in our regular days? And that has to come before we're looking at our soul essence, essentially. I have moved now to consider my first line of defense, my first line of questioning, to be, have I had enough sleep? What have I eaten lately? Like, if I'm feeling like I don't care anything about my life, and like, what does this all even mean? That is where we have to start, is at our most like basic rhythms. And we have to start there first before we can think about our purpose and our creativity and our like divine significance, because sometimes it's just that easy. And we can't create this physical container to nurture like the fullest expression of ourselves if we only ever sleep 5 hours a night. And like some of that also is encapsulated in this householder's path, because some of us are only sleeping 5 hours a night because you have babies that are waking up or whatever it is, and that gets to be your practice. But are we treating ourselves as divine and taking care of those core needs? I am probably like many of you, in times of stress, that's like the first thing to go, but it's also the first thing I need to check in on. And then secondly, we moved into embodiment, that this vessel is not the thing that we are trying to escape from. And so we worked into how to use our body as this tool, and also how to feel into our body and like descend, because that also is where our soul essence lives. So many of the women who come to my work are in this place where they're like, I used to care. I used to be excited about life, and I don't remember how to get her back. And here is where we cultivate. So this also, on the flip side, we all say that we want to feel more, that we want to be more, that we want to like be braver in how we express through the world, most of us. But it's scary. And the scariness isn't like, it's not just you. And when we really start cultivating into this, a lot of us are going to feel some resistance, because we think that we want to like be this big force in the earth. But through centuries, millennia maybe, we have been told that that makes us unsafe, especially as women. And so we have to talk about how this is intimately connected into all the ways that we have been kept small by outside factors. And so I would encourage you to be gentle with yourself. Like the feminine, the nervous system loves gradualness. You don't have to demand this big breakthrough. Let yourself like gently open, gently unfurl. That is okay too. So when we were talking about soul essence, we count in all of these ways that we feel like this divine spark, this creativity, essentially the force of the feminine. And the feminine is like pure energy and ever flowing. And so when we get stuck in this idea of like trying to escape all this energy and feelings, when we get stuck in the idea of trying to live just in our mind, when we get stuck in the idea of just trying to do and produce forever, instead of like relaxing into our energy and allowing replenishment, then we shut off like this source of energy and generation and like liveliness that we are craving. So the idea here of soul essence, of Shakti, is that it all is one container of energy. So your creativity and how you birth things into the world that didn't exist before is the same as your pleasure of like eating beautiful food that you love, like slowly really taking it in. And it's not all the ways that we like numb, that we get stuck in like this escape, that we're trying to take these exits out of our feelings. It's the way that we sink most deeply into our experience. And so that could be like when you really take time to read a book, or even that you organize a closet and you're like, intuitively, this is how I want it to be. And we let it flow from like those more deep parts of ourselves instead of living from up here. So our soul essence is our creativity, our pleasure, our expansiveness, our intuition. It is also like our sexual energy and like our womb space, where we are the bridge between heaven and earth. And so if you think of this too, it doesn't have to be in like a sexual relationship, but it is related in that dimension. But it is asking the question, like, where am I turned on by my life? And where can I take more of that in? Where can I take in more pleasure? In this feminine principle, which is not restricted to women or men, it is just like the element of energetics inside of us that is the feminine. We are also receptive. Like, where can I take in more fully the world? That could be by like just following the threads of curiosity that you have, or by actually accepting help, or asking for it, or actually accepting compliments or gestures of friendship, like even a smile from a stranger in the grocery store, that we let all of that feed us and like flow through and regenerate ourselves. So within the Tantric tradition, Shakti, like the overarching goddess energy, has all these different faces, these different elements, and that's expressed through different goddesses in the Hindu tradition, but also just through different archetypes. So these embodied expressions of an energetic signature. So if I say like warrior archetype, we know how that would feel in our body. We know what kind of like direction and purposefulness that is. And Shakti has 5 faces. That she has the will, the power to be conscious, the power to feel ecstasy, the power of will or desire, the power to know, and the power to act. And some of those things, like the doing, we can be doing from a really shallow place where we think that we need to like have everything perfect to like be accepted by society, or to like earn our rent on this earth, or whatever it is. But we also can do from a place of like deep love, where we are almost like pushed by this energy instead of being exhausted by this overdoing. And so no matter the demands of your life, and I just want to acknowledge that some of us have tougher demands than others, I would love to be able to say to everybody like, oh, you're worn out by your life, like where can you hire support? And that is a question that is worth asking from a place of like, I deserve to feel good, to feel pleasure. But that's not always feasible. But when we integrate more of the Shakti when we live prioritizing our own soul essence, then we also change the energy with which we move through our life. So we drop into our bodies. We can clean. I'm not trying to use like real typical, like we all stay home, whatever examples, but the real fact is a lot of us do. And the real fact is that some of those jobs are not glamorous. So where can I move and express from this place where I'm dropped into my body? I'm activating all of my senses. This soul essence is our sensuality, which is rooted in the word of our senses, of acting, taking in information, pleasure through our ears, through our eyes, through our touch, our smell. So sensuality does sometimes have this connotation of sexuality, but it doesn't necessarily. It is like being seduced by the world around us. And we can do really mundane things in this energy with intention. And that might be like, we need to organize a spreadsheet that's going to make our house move so much more smoothly. Can we let that like well up and express through us? We also recognize in Shakti, in soul essence, how the divine flow of nature moves through us. And that is the quickest way, I think, for most people to recognize what this feels like, is that when you're in nature, that it seems like you are nourished just from the energetics. And so it's pulling that more into our everyday experience. And for some of us, that might be like get in nature more often and like take that shortcut. But also, how can we make more of our regular life feel like this? And so it's using both of those things. Like how can we get our feet in the dirt, the sun on our skin, but also how can we remember that feeling where there isn't like this pressure to overproduce, to live in our mind, that we are actually dropped more into our bodies, into our sensuality, just in how we are moving through our day. So because we are talking about increasing this flow, this regenerative energy, then we also need to talk about creating a container. That we need a container for this energy to be in. That alchemy, which we're going to talk about later, requires a container and heat to change. So when we're pouring more in, then what does this container look like? And for us, we started out talking about rhythms and having a morning practice. That can be a container to generate, to hold more. So last week when we worked through embodiment and we did the swamping exercise, and we're like moving things out and then letting joy exist. That joy part, that magnetism, that radiance, that is what we are building more of in our week of soul essence. But creating that container, whether you're swamping every day or you're just dancing or you are meditating, or you are journaling, essentially we're creating this container so that we can fill up with more energy. And for most of this, that has to be intentional and intentionally built into our day, into our schedule. We need to have space in our emotional life. It's so helpful when we have community built around that. So the reason that this idea of expressing more can feel really scary is because it's so powerful. And I believe, and not just me, believe that is a reason that it has been so intentionally repressed, is because when we talk about words like desire, richness, sensuality, that allows women to get so big and powerful that then they do reckless things like advocate for the oppressed. They are unavailable for relationships that are one-sided or not nourishing. They eliminate toxicity from their lives. Like when we are filled up, when we believe that our desires are divine, that we want more, not because we are flawed, but because we are more, that's when life gets really exciting. But when things come up, when we also might be briefly fearful and terrified, I just want you to give yourself grace that is built in to the system that we live in. It's probably built to some degree into your DNA, into your ancestral memory. And so that's okay. Be gentle and just notice, be curious, is if you are creating more, stepping more into joy and fears come up, how can you give them space and acknowledgement and not make yourself wrong for feeling them? Where can you just get curious about what that's about and allow feeling more of this soul essence to transmute some of that fear? And some of that transmutation of changing form just comes from choosing love. In its deepest, purest form, all of these words that we've talked about is love itself. And when we talk about really feeling love, you pause and think of what that feels like to really feel love. It is animating all of you. And it's like this cleansing wave that moves through us. And sometimes it calls us to speak up. Sometimes it calls us to anger. when we talk about all these archetypes within Shakti, we have archetypes like Durga, the warrior goddess, like Kali, the goddess that like burns everything down that isn't love. We also have Parvati, who is an archetype of like deep whole partnership and relationship. We have goddesses of like love and devotion, and all of them weave together to compose this element of Shakti. And it doesn't just look one way. It is not just like meek and reserved and supportive, though that is one flavor. And so some of us, myself included, grew up thinking that like feminine, nah. And it's just because we maybe weren't taught or didn't recognize the spectrum of ways that this can manifest. And if someone would have explained to me that Shakti, the feminine, can look like just waves of power and creative energy and like mystery and warriorness, I would have been like, oh yeah, totally me. But especially within the Western tradition, we have such limited archetypes available, such limited stories or iterations of women in like fairy tales and folklore and scripture and whatever that is. There are sometimes just a few notes that we have seen. And so I think it's really helpful, whether we are looking into more traditional archetypes or we are looking into specifically like these goddesses in Tantra, that we see that it can be more than one thing. So as we feel these archetypes rise inside of us, when we are generating more of the soul essence, the Shakti, it's just important to acknowledge that they can take different forms. And you might have this rising of like ability to be endlessly like empathetic and supportive and nurturing and loving, and that is beautiful. And you also might have like this warrior huntress energy arise, that as we are filling up our container with more of this soul essence, then it can take different flavors and forms. So the way that we work with this mostly is by allowing ourselves to prioritize feeling more. And sometimes we are lit up, turned on in our lives by doing the thing. By like the thing that's been on our heart, on our mind, we like actually do it. And we drop into our bodies and we engage all of ourselves to make it, and we are replenished by the doing. And sometimes it is by the not doing, by allowing ourselves to take in through all of our senses something like pleasure and joy. And do you know how revolutionary that is to prioritize that? And so even at a lesser level, when we are prioritizing our soul essence, then we have to prioritize our bodies. Every once in a while, I have felt like totally lit up and physically exhausted. Like I've been working on a project now, I've slept for a couple of days, but it's been totally worth it because it's awesome. And then I need to like sleep for 2 days and I'll probably get a migraine. So that my body's like, bad choices, we're down. But it requires us to look at self-care in a different way, that it's not like we're just escaping from our lives or taking that exit ramp into like chocolate and bubble baths, though those can be a thing, but it requires us positioning ourselves differently inside so that we are really taking those moments. There aren't a lot of us, especially here, especially if you're here, that can spend days on end in self-care and replenishment. So when we are prioritizing our soul essence, we take any of these flavors: creativity, sensuality, pleasure, joy, love, connection, sexuality, like any of those, it's all filling up the same bucket, okay? It all counts. So we take those moments and we take them in fully. one of the ways that we get really separate from our feminine, and you'll experience this a little bit in the meditation, is that we don't take things in fully. We don't fully receive them. And a lot of times that has to do with our feelings of deservedness, that we feel like we're never doing enough, being enough to deserve help, support, compliments, whatever it is. And so we practice taking those in. If we have a 5-minute conversation with a friend that really lights that up, we breathe that through our whole systems, and we allow this joy, this essence, this divine spark to be replenished as often as we can. And so even if it's like 1 minute fully enjoying your piece of dark chocolate, which, like, just eat the milk chocolate, that's actually good if you're gonna have one piece. Or you make like a meal that actually feels nourishing. Or you have like, I don't have children, but yeah, I've had sick nieces and nephews, and they're real cuddly for a second. I mean, I think they barf and stuff too. But those moments of like a little cuddle from a child or a pet, or reading something that you really love, like whatever it is that sparks your light a little more, that we prioritize taking that in fully. And when we do that, we can stretch time. We're not just working in linear time. We can make those brief moments count, and we can use them as fuel so that we can do more of the things that maybe don't feel like love and turn on, because we are prioritizing this replenishment. And it requires deep presence, that we have to be so much more mindful. And so those interactions, maybe with your partner or your roommate, aren't just like passing, hey, whatever. We like really sit into them, and we like really like drink in that connection, even if it's just 2 minutes, because we're taking that in as fuel. And so it requires us to not get caught in our to-do list forever, that we are not missing all those moments because we're just thinking about like, well, I need to start supper, or I haven't folded the laundry, or I haven't answered that email, like whatever it is. We learn to be where we really are so that we can get the full magnitude of that nourishment. I love to think about this soul essence, not just as like this swirling, magnificent kaleidoscope energy, but also of like this black earth, that it's like anything is possible from there. You know, that rich, where it's not like tightly packed or muddy, it's like a rich black earth, and you can just see all like the minerals and just feel like anything could grow there. That's one of the visuals I love for this, because then we think about like, I'm just pouring in nourishment, that we breathe in like rain, and we cycle all this pleasure in as nourishment so that something magnificent can grow from here. This is our generative energy. It is the creative seat of all life. And to be this like blossoming, blooming vessel, then we need to be fully resourced. And for a lot of us, that means stepping out of the machine that says we have to do everything all the time and we never turn off. And we get really intentional about a fewer number of things that really matter. And we prioritize that resourceness, especially if we are really giving to other people, especially if you are in a mothering stage of your life. And if you are giving so much, that replenishment is necessary for the giving, but also for you as a person who is most in charge, has the greatest stewardship over their own soul. So it requires us also looking at like, where are we cutting off support? Where do we maybe not trust that person? Like sometimes I used to get into this all the time. Like, they just feel bad for me. They're just trying to be my friend because they feel bad for me. Instead of trusting, like, of course they want to be friends with me. And we like then really are nourished by that interaction. Or like a partner offers to do something and you're like, well, they just feel guilty, so I'll just do it anyway. Like, where are we cutting off support where we could feel more resource? Where are we not doing these simple moments through the day, especially in the morning, that could replenish, that could fill up this container so that we feel more, do more. And we are just not taking those moments and those opportunities to create this container and to fill it up to overflow. So this week we have a meditation, visualization, it's a thing. Oh, I wanted to demo something, just the difference in the masculine and the feminine. So most meditation traditions are actually very masculine. We don't super do that here, but if you're repeating a mantra or just focusing on your breath and you are trying to create stillness, consciousness, like withdraw in from the body, that is very masculine practice, which is great. We need to have discipline there as well. But if you think of like this structure and presence, and you create that in your body, the feminine is just this, like, experiment with that, create this structure and symmetry in your body, and then make this figure 8 with your hands and just notice how your whole body changes. So we're going to experiment with that in the meditation, into moving our hips. That's like the seat on the feminine, and to looking at this receptivity. But the practice this week is mostly how you can use this in your life, how you can create places in your life where you are replenished instead of escaping. So we escape and we buffer all the time. I can do it with the best of them. Binge the Netflix, that's my drug of choice. But whatever it is, are we actually regenerating, replenishing, or are we getting stuck? For me, mostly it is in the regret of not getting enough done, or a feeling like I have to do so much, but feeling not like in my body, like I can't. So just starting to get really mindful about what's actually going on and where we can take those opportunities to replenish, regenerate, like be turned on by our lives, turn our lights all the way on, rekindle that divine spark, and really like nurture it into a flame in our lives. Love you.